and other attendees. I'm Susan Hoff, as I think you know, the chair of the Child Care Task Force, and I want to welcome everyone and then just give a quick overview of our goals as a reminder. The task force goals are to ensure that Workforce Solutions Greater Dallas has the necessary information for the Child Care Assistance Program, state requirements, and local flexibility so that we have a clear understanding of what we can and cannot influence or direct. We are to research the child care assistance practices in other areas and around the state to benchmark ourselves against other work, and then also to conduct a SWOT analysis, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis of the child care assistance program, and then collectively recommend short and long-term goals and proposed strategies for our child care assistance program. And I believe that is our goals, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so first up on the agenda, we have an update from Lori Larea and Demetria, if she's here, to give us a legislative update.
Dee actually sent the paperwork, so I've just posted it. She put it into the agenda. She had a very important meeting today, something she had to attend to, and we understand how that happens. If you'll note on the agenda, she's put in a few of the more pressing policy legislative updates. I don't have in-depth information on those. Maybe when Alan joins, he'd like to say a few words about what's going around. And Susan, you might like to. What I'm going to discuss is more administrative, which is what the commissioners are going to do at Texas Workforce Commission for Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations and the Child Care Block Development Grant. It's massive. This is the 1.3 billion that is coming into the state. So do you want to talk about any of the legislation in particular? This is a lot of the Texas ledge, and it's difficult to say what's what.
Yeah, it is. And so I think I can give a couple of highlights around this legislative session. So last month, I believe, if I've not gotten my days mixed up, there was some really interesting traction in the early childhood child care world. So for the first time ever, the Texas legislature created an early childhood caucus, which it's bipartisan, and it is led by Representative Angie Chin Button, Representative Diego Bernal, I hope I didn't get his name wrong, and Representative Tallarico from Georgetown. But the focus there is to get a strong, as I said, bipartisan group of legislators who are educating themselves around the issues of early childhood, birth to 3, and childcare issues, and making collective really work toward moving forward. And so I think there were a number of grants, and Angie Chin Button chairs a committee that a number of the childcare pieces of legislation come before. And she has been a really strong champion and several, in terms of hearings, but also co-authoring and authoring legislation. So it's really exciting to see that caucus come to fruition. How this moves forward in the legislative session, there are still, 43 days, maybe 40 days left of the session. And this is when things heat up and a lot of stuff is happening fast. So how much of this will pass moving forward, I'm not sure. And, the bigger issue, which I'm sure, or opportunity, which Lori can address more, is around the federal funding that is coming in terms of both immediate support and infrastructure support for childcare. So, again, lots going on, but really positive movement, I think, in the Texas legislature supporting early childhood in a way that I've not seen, and at least not as broadly. So anything else anyone have to add there or questions?
No, I think the rest remains to be seen. This is also true at the federal level, so it's a good segue. The money that's already been approved, let's just talk about what the state's doing with that. And Dee has this hot off the presses from Tuesday. The Tuesday commissioners meeting, Texas has given us a firm figure finally, 1.135748591. So $1.13 billion in change. That's a lot of change to be spent in our system. And what you'll see below is a chart of their decision points and the prioritization of funding. Much of it follows what TWC has done during the pandemic. Low income subsidies, that's 165 million. That's not huge. Texas Rising Star support, 85. That's big. That's a lot of support for quality. Welcome, Alan. A capacity expansion, 55 million. We're just getting into what the state is going to do with their $1.13 billion out of, I know it's daunting. It is daunting for the state as well. Their staff is a little concerned that this is just such a heavy lift. It's massive. You have capacity expansion support for early child professionals, another 7 million, studies and reports and evaluations. That 3 million I find curious because that's a lot for studies, and especially if those studies are not well directed. By that I mean, hire some people who really know the stories. I was talking earlier with Child Care Group about some issues with transferring money. We'll get into that in a minute, about moving money to the next year to preserve it. One of the things that concerns me is it's almost too much money if we're stuck with the system that we have. Paying for slots and giving lip service to quality, it's just not working for me. So I took the opportunity to share that with the policy director out of Schumer's office. And now I do have another meeting next week with the new Secretary of Labor. And so I'll be talking to Mayor Marty, and I'm going to talk about childcare as a part of the workforce infrastructure. Now, some of the stuff Susan sent earlier in an NPR article, I think, Susan, we could cover some of that after this, because it does show that the feds have one more layer of funding that may solve more of this. I do have a problem with everything being wrapped in tax credits. We know a lot of people who are working poor. They're just outside our eligibility for subsidy. They have no recourse. And I don't think, even if it's a monthly tax abatement, that we're talking about enough money to put their children in quality care and sustain the situation. I'll leave it at that. Studies, reports, evaluations. I would love to begin some work in that arena, even if we don't have the money locally. But there has to be a conversation about the industry itself, as if it were technology, as if it were manufacturing. How does it support itself? The industry itself is somewhat on life support, and people seem fine with that. Enough money to keep it going, enough money to make sure the facilities are there, enough money to keep their staff at same salary, which is not necessarily a living wage. We've got to get away from that. And I don't think people are looking at that. They're throwing it, all these dollars, billions of dollars nationally, going into a system that is not thriving. The administration and implementation cost and amount remaining in reserve. 25 million held back in reserve. That's a lot of planning money. So that's a good thing. If we think of things that they ought to be doing, I think it's a nice point of we could inject some innovation. We could talk to them about some things perhaps that they're not doing. And we have to hurry with that, because TWC will publish this, but they move fast to ground their activity. Decision point 2, child care relief grants. Now, when I'm sharing a screen, you can see the whole document or not? Okay, cool. 775 million in relief funding, 14,000 CCDF eligible regulated providers. These providers have now become very important to the system for the first time that I can ever remember. And TWC is going to write direct payments to these providers, and it's based on the size of seats in each school or home. So if you have a license in Dallas, you possibly will get a substantial five-figure sum. We don't know how that's going to go. Thank goodness we're not in charge of it. There's a lot to be done with this, but you see how it trickles down and what they're talking about. But the state plans to write these checks themselves, much as we did with the CARES Act money locally. We wrote those little micro grants, 3,000 and 5,000 to each provider. This is big money. and it's bigger money in Tarrant County, and it's bigger money in some of the areas that have a higher reimbursement rate, which annoys me, as you can imagine. We are stuck with our rate survey, and the new rate survey won't be out until September, but our rate survey, it was mentioned earlier, Tori mentioned to me, when can we break free of that? It is not a good stand-in for true cost, and it may not even be substantially relevant when it comes to what people are actually paying for care because of the pandemic. We just have too many people not in the game right now to judge whether or not they can put much stock on that rate survey.
Lori, just a clarifying question. I want to make sure everybody on the call understands what the market rate survey is and what the challenges are with it. If you could give just like a little, 2-second overview of that.
You got it. Every year around January, the state releases through their contractors, they release a survey to childcare providers asking them to report their market rates for care by age, by type of center. In the past, many of the for-profit entities that are not part of our system just ignore the survey. They learned through COVID that it's really smart to be a part of the system. So I don't think we're going to have that problem, but I don't know who was available in January to worry about a survey. So during COVID, there are closed centers. It could go 3 different ways. One, it could be very similar to the past, which is 20% report, maybe 40%, if we're lucky to say, yes, this is what I charge the public to provide care. And you've got to remember, the whole point is government money cannot be used to set the market rate. So we are not allowed to pay more than the market rate or to establish our own rates. We must put it somewhere in keeping with what the market will bear. I'm just worried during COVID, we don't get that reading at all. The other scenario would be that more of the for-profit higher end providers respond than usual, which would swing our rates up. And sadly, the other would be that everybody's too busy to touch the survey, especially the providers we depend on. I would like to at least get them in here. So the market survey would be weaker this year in our estimation than in any past year. And that's true throughout the state, except small rural areas that have never really shut down. But it's going to be very important for Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas Metro.
Lori, what's the implication? Is it good or bad if the rate is set higher, if some of the higher cost providers are the ones sending in their info?
Could be very good for us. Very good indeed. We still can't pay more than anyone's published rates as a center. But for those that are higher than what we're currently paying, yes, we could finally pay their published rate.
And has there been, just my only other question, has there been much sort of, like, does Child Care Group do much outreach to centers on, like, potentially, a campaign to get them to set a higher public rate?
We have to be careful about that. Yeah, you can't really. Now, I did it on a radio show on a Facebook Live the other day, telling the centers to quit underestimating the value of their work. That's how I did it, which I was like, I know you're trying to help families in your community, but look at what it costs. You have to at least cover your cost in these situations. And if you're setting your rates such that you are not covering, what is your point? I mean, you've got to begin to set a higher bar for yourselves and say, this is what it costs to do what we do for you.
I feel like we need to get some kind of a legal reading on that. Like, if a center sets a high rate, it's still within their discretion to be able to, if a family shows up, to say, we're going to give you a 25% discount, wouldn't it?
Yes, they would be scholarshiping people in, but we have a problem if that becomes, if someone investigates and that is perceived to have been a false publication of rate because nobody's paying the published rate except the government funds. That's the risk we run.
No, I think the issue, I guess what I really want to push on, and I just have to believe that like if there really is a true cost and there's a justifiable true cost, that's what you would set your rate against. And yes. If you're having to give discounts against the true cost just to keep the lights on because nobody in your community, that doesn't mean that that's not actually the rate that you need. I feel like it would, you either need to have, again, I'm not the lawyer, which is why I feel like we need to consult somebody on this, but I feel like if you've got a strong justification for true cost, like I'd feel a lot more protected than if someone was just sort of like, I'm going to charge $1 million a slot and then, give everyone, 99%, whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I'm reflecting on something that happens with career schools. And so I'm trying to think my way through this with government money. And generally it's going to apply everywhere. If you're paying the published rate, but you find out that only government funds are paying the published rate, that there's not even a class of people paying the market rate with private money, then it's suspect. And I've seen major schools close over that issue. So I don't know about childcare, but just government is very funny about that. They want to pay under market rate. They don't want to pay over at in exception to everyone else in the program. So we'd have to have some.
Fuzzy is that centers that are probably oversampled oftentimes in the market rate survey are those that traditionally have a high prevalence of subsidy enrollments. And so they're going to publish what it is and also what the market can bear in their community. And so that's, so I don't think the market survey, the way it was designed, was made to devalue the cost of childcare, but that's what has happened. It's always been way.
So let me follow up in a little more general, because what it seems like is we're getting a tremendous amount of money, and we're shackled to the processes and infrastructure that already exists. Can any of this money be used, for example, to put together a task force who investigates market value and recommends on, resetting it or doing a different process to set it? Or are we just have to work within these confines?
I think that would be something that we could advocate for at the state, maybe for Dallas specifically, with their $3 million set aside about surveys and studies. But you're spot on with your analysis. We are shackled by all of these rules, which is why I've told leadership, if you just keep pumping money into a broken infrastructure, you don't solve the problem. So Federal Reserve would be another partner perhaps to bring into this, but confront them with something other than cost of quality and with advocacy. Ours is a business model. We're talking about the industry of childcare, the infrastructure that supports our workforce. And that's been my tact, is let's look at it as though you were investing. Would you put money in this? No. So why is the federal government putting so much money without fixing the major pillars in here that would make it a more vibrant, sustainable industry?
Well, Lori, I largely agree with that. I think that point that you just made is really important in terms of industry, but I also think that this is an industry issue from the standpoint of, like, we're trying to hold up the just general economy from a state perspective. People have to be able to go to work.
Yes.
And the business the support system to allow people to go to work has to be solvent. And right now it's not solvent for at the rate. I guess part of what I'm wondering, I think you and the team always do such a great job. And when we had Reagan down here to kind of brief us on stuff, I'm just wondering who it is that maybe some folks on the board can do some dirty work in terms of asking really tough questions so that they understand the rulemaking at the state is not meeting the needs of local without putting the staff in a situation to be at odds.
Yeah, I would tag on to that too, because some of this it appears from this presentation that you're providing, which thank you, Lori, is that TWC will really be tasked with determining exactly how all the money goes. I still think there's debate in the legislature as to how much they will weigh in to relief dollars, including this money, because that to me, it's hard if you're the rulemaking entity to change the rules, because you know how to operate within a system and you've got a whole bunch of money that fell on you. So I don't know if they TWC by themselves are able to make big sweeping infrastructure changes, or if they need some external support, whether that's legislatively, private sector, or both. And so, but, and the thing is, the challenges is that it's here right now. It's not like this is money that's going to be 2 or 3 years out. It's like now, and you probably have maybe 24 months to get this right.
The most obvious choice for giving feedback that is specific to program design and finding out why we can or can't would be Reagan.
Mhm.
To say, are there things that we could do except for
Mhm.
federal rule in some cases? Because she has expanded this far better than I would have ever expected TWC to manage in the past. She's very innovative and she is pushing the envelope, but it's then to ask, where will we help you? What would we do to help you? The other option is the chairman, Chairman Daniel, is very interested in this conversation of the economy. He is from the economic development side of the house. I think presenting him with specifics that we would like to accomplish that would do what Alan was talking about, drive this as that reason that people can participate in the market, begin to count something we've always talked about. Why are we not counting the number of workers, the number of people who go back to work because there is a substantial childcare system that is meeting their needs, and who are being left out because the system is not? Automatically you could say one of the problems is the income guideline and the income restriction. The income restriction is so serious that it prevents a family of 4 who's barely making a living wage from participating. It seems in times of COVID, that would have been a smart idea, just to raise the ceiling, but that is a federal issue.
Yeah.
But we have access. We can go to people, and ask the questions. But yeah, if you guys would like to work on some specifics to pitch to Reagan after looking at this, but why not this? And I cautioned Tori earlier, we have got to get specific about this. We can't just say, pay us more to do these slots, because there are so many restrictions on that. But perhaps we need to do our own survey and challenge the market survey. That would be one issue I'd try, that we could maybe conduct something that includes a larger portion of our real providers who do the largest number of kids for us and private pay, and start challenging whether or not we have better data than whatever comes in this market survey, because it is not inclusive.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that I'm willing to work with you. And so is Dee. We also want to look at slot levels. Contracted slots. My brain just flipped out. The contracted slots on this would be helping some providers to have a contract of commitment that we will pay for a classroom, or we will pay for 25 seats without them risking. And that would be a constant pay to that center. But the rules around that are ridiculous. So the legislature is looking at limiting how many restrictions we have to deal with, which may make us all a little more willing to risk it, that there may be a lot better chance of us succeeding.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it's great. I mean, I think if we could put together 2 or 3, and I'm certainly happy to put time into it, and I'm sure others too, but 2 or 3 really distinct position papers that, to your point, get super tangible. Because I think, you can get lost in the maze of this real fast, of things that would, be good for us locally. It could be really helpful. And I think we've got to align the economic interests. The discussion about what's good overall for jobs, what's good for the small business industry that is childcare, and also what's good from a living wage job perspective of childcare workers. Those 3 things can be put into alignment instead of working against one another, which happens when we deal with them in isolation.
Absolutely.
Lori, do you know any other states, or could we do some research to see how they do their market rate survey?
Can check. There are many that don't use the survey activity. I actually have to return a call to New York City on something. Let me check with them. There's a lot of big cities that do something very, very different. Not sure on that. Let's look around. I
Yeah.
think some do surveys, but it's like half and half. There's two stated in the law. There's two options. I can't remember what they are. You can either do the market survey or I can't remember.
But
Anyway,
this market survey, the way it exists is not a federal requirement. It's just the way things are right now. And I
And I
do
think we
think it is
create-
one of
create
the
a survey.
causes of challenges, because it deflates what the actual cost is, and then that just perpetuates an underfunded system.
So is
Yeah.
this a state ruling, state by state process?
They're given two options in the federal law, and that's the one I couldn't remember what the other option is. And each state can elect. And then they do describe their own process, I believe, as long as it conforms to one, two, three of what you do in a survey. But how you do it's up to the state.
Let's find out what the options are, those one and two options, and see if we can benchmark any other. New York would probably be a good one to look at.
They tend to do things in a big way because they have such land to cover. It's like, they're not messing around. On the decision point two, the relief grants, these are where the money gets really big. Provider size, they must be licensed. License capacity is the effect. Quality rated providers will get more, of course. And then childcare deserts. And I love that there's a definition on deserts. That was debated. Was that everything that goes into it? But that's something we should look at. We know that in Irving, we have a limited number in certain areas of Irving, particularly south, and in Pleasant Grove. It's a chicken and an egg, though. Are there fewer centers because fewer people put their children, their infants in care? Or do they not put their infants in care because there's fewer quality centers? So we're not really sure on that one. But both of those are largely Hispanic populations, and there is a cultural break there. So we need to examine what our childcare, who represents childcare deserts for us, and do as much as we can to cultivate a better atmosphere. This is the kind of money we're talking about, guys. Check out Dallas.
That's a lot for a childcare center.
These are
That's
direct
a lot.
grants from the state.
Are there any guidelines or support about what to do with the money?
I'm sure there'll be something, Susan, but I haven't seen it from the state. None of this will be to elect, the board will not elect the issues. Everything will come from the state. And as I said, I'm thankful they're doing this because I like the fact it's not just subsidized centers. We are giving real benefit to all licensed facilities. And they may in turn give a little more benefit to the subsidy system so that we would get better providers, or at least hesitant providers to join us, to become part of our delivery system so that we expand our childcare range in the community. Some interesting facts and figures. As I mentioned, if you're in Tarrant County, though, you get more. I don't understand that, except their rates are higher. So I know that some of these sums are predicated on rates. Questions, concerns?
So what do we know about what they will allow? Are you saying we don't have that information? So can they provide professional development for their staff? Can they build facilities? What's the range of things that would be allowable?
I believe in this, it is for infrastructure costs, but I'm not sure how much proof they have to give. When we were doing the checks, we asked that they sustain their employees and try to keep them off unemployment. They might connect that to this. I don't know that they will. Possibly, if they're a quality provider, they have to show that they're spending some of the money to sustain their four-star or increase their star rating, especially if they're a 2 or a 3, that they're going to do better. It's an incentive to participate in the system and an incentive to do better in the system. Our goal would be to have everyone as a licensed 4-star provider. In fact, the providers have now asked, where's our 5th star? They want to be like a nice restaurant. They want to be a 5-star. That's Tabitha, one of our best friends. She really is pushing that we need more in terms of set the bar higher, give more incentive, make it better. But the state could get very specific. I just don't think they have time to do that. This money needs to go out, but I'm pretty sure they're going to ask for some form of documentation or receipt that this did not just go into excess profit.
Yeah.
You're giving this to
Monitor that. I would not want to be in charge of that.
No, ma'am. As I say, I seldom say no, as all of you know, even when it probably isn't in my best interest. On this one, I was like, oh, that's really fine with us. We tried this during CARES Act. It's very difficult. And we were only dealing with $5,000 tops. This is a lot of money.
Well, my
But-
understanding for schools is that, and this is not formal or anything, but that they will be asked to develop a plan within a certain amount of time and then submit that plan. It doesn't look like that's what's happening here.
I don't believe so, because I think they will probably ask them to report after the fact, but I'll check with Reagan on that. I don't see anywhere in here, they're talking about sample grant amounts, but they have to give them to everyone. Texas decided they needed to make sure every licensed center gets an infusion. So that's why I think it's going to be a little bit different. We'll check though. I'll ask if there's a set. I'm sure they didn't send it out to us since we're not doing this portion, but doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
It's not terribly like satisfying or we'll make it so easy, but I mean, it's not just in childcare, across the board with the recovery plan. There's just a lot of situations where it comes down to risk tolerance. Like there's so many resources coming through to be used so quickly without the rulemaking in place to provide clear definition that it's how comfortable do you feel, and that like it's going to be okay, or that, asking permission versus or asking forgiveness versus permission on certain things.
Sure that it is getting though to a point where things are going to tighten up, and we know that.
Yeah.
This money will be going out simultaneously with the, we're resuming our prior work.
Let me ask this one technical question that I put in the chat, which is just, do we know, like, from just the area size on the childcare deserts? Like, I got the definition that like of 3 times, but like, is that based off of a zip code, or is that a census tract, or what unit of change are we looking at where, or the geographic unit where the number of children is 3 times?
I think that's subject to our description of the desert. I think that might have been some of the controversy around how big, how wide, what area. I don't know that we're there yet. I'm sure we could support it and see. We just define it ourselves instead of asking permission. I'm back to that. Define for ourselves what census tract is involved, because you're talking about community resource. So I think we could look maybe to CDBG funds at the, at the city and find out how any of our cities, how Irving maps out community development, and maybe go with a pre-existing federal determination of what a tract is. But I don't know. That's a really good question, Alan.
Well, look, census tract, I mean, my hope is it's not zip code, because zip code is like apples to oranges, one zip code to another. But well, whatever it is, we can have to put mapping together or something like that. But it'd be good to know.
And my guess is it's pretty vague, because if you think about rural areas, every rural area probably counts as a childcare desert. And so how, they must leave some of that up to locality. But figuring that out in a consistent way for our region or our county, Alan, would be a really good idea. So we all know what we're talking about. Yeah.
And we'll check that labor code, Alan, later and find out if there's any further. Did they cut off, or did we even cut off? I see a comma instead of a period. We may have mashed this together and left out a piece.
I mean, if it's helpful, we could put some maps across some different units of change and bring it back to folks, just so that, the group or the team or whatever can just decide what do you want to use on a consistent basis.
Right. And maybe we get the state. Well, I think we do it ourselves. I think that is the better.
I'd start with it ourselves, because
Yeah.
I think that's, and if it is true that you get to define it for your own self, I'd just do that. And
As long as we can defend it as a number of children. Again, the 2 deserts I point to chicken and the egg. We've got people who do not use the childcare system. Is that because they don't appreciate the quality that's there? If it were better, they would use it, or would they never use it because there is a social stigma against your child being in a paid service?
You're just not going to go to work. So that to me goes back to the, that I think it's $3 million, if I'm remembering correctly, some amount that looks like it's in that big budget
Right.
for evaluation and studies. I think we make all kinds of assumptions that are educated guesses as to what's going on in the workforce and why people aren't going to work, but we really don't have good data about that. We have good anecdotal information based on, years of experience. But I think it would be really important as we're building out an infrastructure, how many women, we hear about She Session, have really decided going back to work's not worth it. It cost me too much, or, hey, I stayed home with my kids for these last year and I had so much fun. I'm going to do it the rest of my life. So what is really going on? Because I don't think we know. And I think the challenge there is we could, without the data underlying and what it tells us, even, be focused on creating better infrastructure, but we're solving the wrong problems. And so
Yes.
I just think that evaluation piece is so critically important. And like you said, a good one too, but like really paying for.
I kind of covered this in the board meeting, but we've done a little more work. We start with 90 million October 1, 90 million. 2% of that can be used for quality on our end. And one of the things we could determine as quality might be this study, or we could define it in admin and ops. That's why I'm thinking Federal Reserve, work with someone on the ground here who knows the territory, and we define what the research should describe for us. We give them that indication about Dallas County, not about Concho, not about,
Yeah, you scope the work specific to our county. Yeah, and what are the research questions we need the information on. Yeah, I would be all, whatever we could do to support that, I think would be fantastic.
And I think we move it faster as well. We get what we need when we need it. Now, we may even be able to do that before October. As I looked at Ashley did an analysis, Rowena did an analysis, and then Child Care Group is looking at the state's analysis. So the state began with the conversation, and I have to tell you, this is brilliance on their part. Child care money should not be lost. We're not spending it through no fault of our own. We get to decide what amount of money to declare as carry forward, and they will take it away from us this year and contract it to us in October. The risk we run is we cannot run out of money by September 30. They will not remedy that.
Well, I remember that.
Exactly. And what we don't spend by October 31st, we will lose. So we have to thread the needle. In doing that, our figures are everything from the state's guess of 11 million to move forward. Our guess is closer to 15. So just think of that, plus the 90 million. Plus that's a lot of money on the other end. The seat numbers move with it. So does the quality money we think. So I'm looking at the 2%. I'm pretty sure it's 2% of what you end up granting. Therefore, it would be much larger after October. So there's a lot of things going on that are helping us to move forward in a very intentional way, particularly on who we serve. We will make goals this year, it appears, by moving that money forward. Because it will bring it down to who we've served, and there's no penalty for not serving people who don't want to go back to childcare right now. There's a lot going on in the system that makes it a good time to flex locally and figure out who we are and what we want to be, and how to infuse what they're measuring. How do we pick that up for our community and meet them where they are, or challenge their figures that describe Dallas? That's probably a bigger issue. And all this is administrative right now. None of this is legislative. So that does help us.
Yeah, that does. Yeah. Go ahead.
The third decision point, technical assistance, business coaches. And we all saw this sort of start here with the training of a technical person who can run the back office so that the childcare provider can get better records and an automated system and so forth. I don't know how I feel about this one. It's $15 million in business assistant, business coaching. That's going to be interesting done at the state level. The state is also resuming a lot of work at the state level. The assessor project will probably go to the state. This will go to the state. So it's a lot of top down. I think that's purely economy of scale, purely that they don't trust that 28 boards could do this consistently and as efficiently as they can do it from the state right now. I hope that does not hang on, but I get it for this point in childcare. It's time to get more happening in the field. So hopefully that's all we're seeing. Contracted slots, we are involved. We are part of the discussion. We were on the call yesterday. We've been on several calls. I want to do this, but I want to do something that makes us better, not just experimental. We've done this before, Susan. Goes back to the 90s, actually, when people did have a contract, but now it's steeped in rules. It's steeped in nonsense, frankly. So it says here, no timeline is established, and that's true. But we are one of maybe 7 boards who are saying, oh yes, we're going to push this. We're going to push this forward. We need to at least examine the stability that could be provided, particularly in the 0 to 3 space, by having a contract to do your work so that you know whether that space is full on Tuesday or doesn't fill until Friday. Your income is unaltered. You will get the payments, much as private pay. I paid childcare for 10 years, as long as I could keep him there. And you pay first of the week, every week, whether your child's sitting in that classroom or not.
That's, yeah, you pay for your spot. Yeah.
So I always held, we don't treat the industry fairly with government money. We should treat them under their rules. And I don't know why we don't pay for every week at the first of the week, regardless, because that's what it takes to run a childcare center. So this will be one of those conversations. How do we get a little more stable environment with some of our better providers? Industry partnerships. And I wanted to make sure you guys are noticing this. We did get a call. I got a personal call saying, surely Dallas will do this. I don't know that it's as popular as the state thought it would be because it's small money comparatively. They want us to engage some private employers, corporations, opportunity to invest in childhood education. TWC wants to leverage private donations to their childcare. It's kind of our match conversation that y'all always hear we're having trouble with. It's no easier this year. It's been very, very difficult for Dee. She got us there, but it's with a letter sharing match from Tarrant County again. But we are finding more and more public institutions that are noticing that we need this money. So if you notice projects to support early child education that fall under there, and they're vast. There are a lot of things we can do under industry partnerships, but the grants are not large enough. These need to be robust for Dallas market, but they're kind of built around an average Texas. So I think they're just barely 6 figures.
So the way it would work then, if I'm reading this correctly, is a private partner, so a corporation or an employer or foundation would give the money to TWC, and then TWC would match it 1-to-1 to whatever the amount is to do one of these projects, but the money would go directly to TWC and then come back to whoever the project lead is. Which could not be, I'm assuming it could not be the corporation or the foundation because the money couldn't come back to the source, right?
That one's debatable because it is, none of them are actually doing the they're not doing childcare slots, right? They're only doing the quality initiatives. So I wouldn't see that the benefit would be direct to the employer. I think that had to be negotiated. It doesn't look like we would be supplanting anything. Yeah, be more like, well, but in our area, wouldn't it be more foundations than actual employers? I'm just thinking the old TI model. They threw a lot of quality money at childcare. It would have been cool if they could have given it to the state and gotten double the money.
Yeah.
Well, take something like Redbird, right? That development's looking to put a lot of childcare involved, and so I think there's certainly some examples of folks that are organically planning childcare already, this might be helpful for them to know on the front end if they can draw down more dollars.
Good point. Good point. And since we are tenants, we could have that discussion with Peter. I think they're a little ways away from that. They're doing so well in getting everything cleaned up and filled out. It's been pretty bad. The parking areas and such during this time, it's been very difficult because they're moving, a very old facility into the new age. And our neighbors are building out beautiful facilities, UT Southwestern, Parkland, those buildings will be phenomenal. And I'm just proud to be a part of that structure. It's going to be very interesting. There are childcare providers already watching because they know it could compete with their business. And I think it's important to engage them, make sure it's different and special. And different in a way that they still get their customers as well as the new improved version of childcare.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to have the conversation with Peter because the call center tenant is
Chime.
pushing them Chime is pushing them for childcare. The last 2 times I've had conversations with him, sort of unprompted, he's brought up childcare because he's trying to figure that out. So it's probably better for to engage than for me to, since I don't actually know what I'm talking about. I just nod my head when he says childcare.
Something you bring up, if it's what I think it is in that location, they're looking for non-traditional hours of care because their work goes well beyond 5 o'clock with call center. You can imagine. So we have yet to have a policy in our board for the cost of non-traditional hours. And that is something that Dee and I will work on and bring back to the board. It is less regulated perhaps because there's no one, I think, in Dallas that reported that they have non-traditional hours. We need 24-hour care in our community. We are a major city that does not have that. So it makes it hard to set the rates. But that could really help with something that they're trying to create that nobody else has. It would not compete with anyone else in the area to have a center that says you drop off at 5 or at 4 when you start your shift and your child is picked up at 9:30 tonight. So that's an interesting twist. And it would be great if it's available to all people who work, particularly those hospital teams. If they're going to have a clinic with Parkland and UT Southwestern, Saturday care, we have very few providers. We mostly have a very traditional childcare system that operates as the schools operate. I would say that's their after school care, but that cuts off at 6:30, 7 at the latest. And I don't know many that do that anymore. So yeah, that's a really good avenue for a non-competitive arena. We'll work on that and see if we can get 24-hour cost, and the cost will be variable. If they're through the night, that kind of thing, we probably need one for drop off a sick child. So there's several things we've never tackled that would maybe give us, and it might give our providers a better idea of what's in it for them if they think they can manage that kind of care. Good job. Texas Rising Star revisions delay the TRS revision implementation to April 1. We're past that to ensure that Texas Rising Star assessors have sufficient time to learn the WD letters. The training of assessors has become critical, but I find that it looks a whole lot like licensing at this point. If you're out there reviewing for licensing, they want you to work from a handbook. They want you to be very specific. As the assessors are out there, not the mentors, we'll keep the mentors, but the assessors, at some point, probably next session, somebody's going to claim that this is redundancy, that we have assessors doing a handbook and we have licensing doing a handbook.
It gets hard for the providers too.
Oh gosh.
It's hard. Yeah.
But right now it is stressing because they don't use the same handbook.
Yes, that's really hard. It'd be great if they checked you on the same thing, but it's pretty maddening.
They're going the wrong way to avoid redundancy, which is just change the questions. It's like, no, that's not cool. That doesn't help. Okay, and we're up to CPAL. Do you want to talk to us a little bit, Alan, about what's been going on in your world having to do with childcare?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be pretty anticlimactic. I think appreciate you adding this to the agenda, Lori. I think this is just because there was a little bit of media around a grant that we received from the Dallas Foundation to make birth to three care a major focus area of our work at CPAL. I'd really say just kind of two things for how it interplays with this work. One is like one of our big goals is to make sure that we don't define birth to three care and childcare as just synonyms. Certainly childcare is a really, really important piece of birth to three care, but we think that the research on what we can do to help drive development and get kids off to the best start on their first 1,000 days is much broader than just sort of traditional childcare like we're talking about here on the workforce board. So that's part one. So we'll be trying to really drive progress across a plethora of systems, not just the childcare system. And the second is just, I don't think this is going to come as a big surprise, but we just have a lot of data deficiencies and we have a lot of data systems deficiencies. So there's a lot of situations, even within childcare, where like take our quality ratings, right now that's housed on a series of PDFs, like there's a lot of things that we intend to invest in terms of databasing and analysis and looking at some of the gaps and some of the types of investigations that like Susan was talking about earlier. It's fantastic, in some cases when we're able to, as a system, move resources to have really important big studies like what's the impact on sort of jobs. That's worthy of having a Federal Reserve, et cetera. But there's a lot of qualitative research or data collection infrastructure that doesn't exist in Dallas, and frankly doesn't exist in many local communities around the country that for a set of fragmented systems like childcare is, but also like our birth to three infrastructure is in Dallas. It's you can't invest enough in data collection that to hopefully find things that can be activated, not just what I'll kind of describe as data systems for compliance that we have right now. I think we need a lot more data systems for action and for discretionary action, and that's going to be the focus area. We've hired a senior director that'll be starting in July, and so we'll look forward to introducing the workforce team and the folks on this committee individually to Jeff Sullivan when he starts in a couple months. So thanks for just giving me a chance to say a few words about it.
I appreciate that. I think we always need to keep up, guys. There are lots of people in this arena. Redundancy is a conversation, but when there are differences that matter, like CPALs, differences that have never happened, it's not just a committee meeting around a table to do what we do. It's something that will happen that will help inform our decisions, Alan. So I thank you for pursuing that. And knowing how you handle data, I trust this will be something that will become statewide information, and the state will want to replicate a lot of what you do to find out, oh, well, we didn't look at that yet. It's great information once you get started. I know sitting around your table, I know how beneficial it all is. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks. One last note, which is, I don't know if this group's talked about, but Megan Schneider started at the state also, and she's the quad director TA. So she's interfacing with this, and very similarly to your point, there's a lot that I think will start to happen at the state in trying to bring some different data systems together. So, if you haven't had a chance to speak with Megan, she's dynamite, and I think will bring a lot to the system.
Yeah, she's great. She came most recently from Deloitte, but she has a background in, I think she was at Children at Risk at some point in her career, at LBJ grad. So she's really smart. So I'm really pleased she's in that position.
Just Susan, if I can take one more moment, and then we'll go back to you with assignments, next steps, general discussion. If you'll note, there is a hearing tonight. Granicus is a platform that's just like watching a movie. But there will be an opportunity, it says, for engagement. It's quite a large discussion. That's my only problem. They think they're going to do this at a hearing tonight. I don't know how long that will go. So I know it has been pushed out to the providers, but just a note, the 2022-24 state plan, and providers are not shy. So I'll take this down if that's okay. Stop sharing, and then we can see each other again and do other things.
One long hearing. Yeah. Get your pajamas. So, so thank you all. So let's kind of, I'm going to recap what I think I heard, and then let's talk about next steps. Thank you, Lori, and I know Dee too, gathering information about both legislatively and I think even more probably in this instance, critical around the additional funding that's coming down, which is 1.3 billion and some change, right? If I'm remembering correctly, it's a lot of money. And so, you know, while we want to be really grateful for that, having, you know that there are many people here, including you, Lori, who've worked for that forever and ever. I'm thinking through how we might be able to influence infrastructure rather than just, I kind of liken it to, if you think of the childcare system as something as a net with a whole lot of holes in it, if you drop a whole lot of money on it, your money's going to fall on the floor. So how do you fix the net in addition to, so that you can actually utilize that money in the long term? So, I think one of the things that we identified, and I hope you can help us figure out a little bit more, is thinking through the market rate survey, and if that's a driver of some of the, the defund or underrating the cost of care, whether it's quality or not, and if there's something that we could do at the Dallas level, thinking through, whether that's local dollars or is there something in that big $1 billion budget in that $3 million line around evaluation. Might that be something that's used for a local level study to look at cost of care, for one thing, beyond the market rate, but also more broadly, what's going on in the workforce, who's not coming back and why, and what are the barriers, so that we really have a real, and I think, thank you, Alan, too, and looking at some more information around childcare desert and how do we define that for our own area as well. So I think, again, is, what I push back to you, Lori, is how can we as a body be helpful and getting any of that moving forward? Because the last thing I want to do is cause trouble. My causing trouble days are over, I promise. I did that all, like 15 years ago. So I just want to make sure that whatever lever we propose to pull or push, it is the right one. So I'd look to your guidance on that.
You're very kind. All of you provide such great support. Just to know we can share this with you, to hear questions that are not inside the box. We are all inside the box. When I'm with the state or when I'm with the childcare group, we don't speak about things that you speak about. So please keep the comments coming. Look at this from I don't want to teach you how to do what we do, because then you're not as valuable to us as you are looking at it from the outside and saying, why does that happen? Why isn't that fixed? It helps us to know what's really going on. Other things is, we are becoming a very interesting task force. There might be others on the board that should participate. Increased participation of this group. I think that would be good. I think, Susan, you did. I would love for you to talk a little bit about the NPR article that you shared. I didn't have time to flip it into this invite, but that's some really interesting language coming from an infrastructure package. We're all hearing that infrastructure is too big and infrastructure includes too much. But then we're talking here about the industry of childcare that is a necessary infrastructure, just like a bus, to get people to work. And so when you look at it that way, it is relevant, but we know that not everybody in the world knows that. They don't see that as an infrastructure that you'd pay for with government money. A lot of tax abatement, a lot of issues that I don't think solve the problem, but it is digging deeper than I envisioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the biggest challenge to me, and I didn't read it real in depth, I need to look at it again, is that tax incentives are not going to help a lot of childcare providers because they're either nonprofit or they don't, I mean, you don't pay taxes if you don't make any money. And
Right.
so to give me a $5,000 tax credit to pay my staff more, the thinking, it's like one of those things when I was a kindergarten teacher, I would say, I like the way you're thinking. But yeah, it's like but I don't, I think that it's not, not informed well by what the actual field is like. That's what I would say. So again, but first time I've heard people talk about it, I mean, and on the other end too, is like both on the childcare end as well as on the elder care end, which there are an awful lot of similarities in those two systems. I mean, an underpaid workforce, undervalued, and over my last few years, I've learned an awful lot about both and how they are a lot alike. So, I want to stop now, and because we've got a few more minutes, a little bit more, and see what questions people have, because I think that helps us inform what we ought to do next. So I don't know if Stephanie or Bessie, questions, comments?
I did have, and it's kind of like parameters of what we do and what other entities do. I mean, so I thought the discussion about non-traditional hours for childcare was extremely interesting and important. Is that something that's within our purview to do or to study or to pilot? So where do we end and others begin?
And that's becoming a very interesting conversation. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about CPAL. CPAL is very distinct in what they're going to do. What this committee does is very distinct to workforce. I described us to DISD as being the largest consumer of childcare in Dallas County. But we were not included in their original plan to study 0 to 3 care. We're not at the table. Susan is by virtue of United Way, and she's the only way I've gotten that kind of info. Alan, are you also at that table?
Alan is too.
Okay. That, and then we have Early Matters Dallas that does something else. We have Childcare Group that not only does what we pay them to do, which is purchase care, subsidized care for families, but they also run Head Start centers throughout the community. So they are both a provider of care, which CPAL is not, Early Matters is not, DISD is not right now, and we, the board, are not. So they occupy that provider space, and then they engage providers. Rhonda runs a wonderful coffee chat every Thursday morning with the providers, as well as several other engagements of providers. And I've done some more work with providers. I love it because it's real world. We're finally talking to the providers. The DISD work right now does not include providers. So there almost needs to be that original ecosystem that we defined. We need to expand that ecosystem now because there are other people. But I do think we're going to recognize redundancy in some way. Because when you throw this much money at a problem, more people get interested in the problem.
That is true.
I think Bessie was next.
So thanks for just bringing me up to speed, and I am gaining my footing as being on this sub team. So very interesting thing. So actually some of the questions were asked as I was listening, and more specifically, it was about the benchmarking that we're going to do. And I know you said that you have a call with New York. My question is are there other cities that might be able to, so we can have more than one data point of what we might want to utilize? So that was one question I had. And then just the out of the box thinking, I was echoing what Stephanie said about just the non-traditional ways that childcare is needed. And are we thinking about that? To me, that's the impact of what we could, be the trailblazers in how we do it. Let's see, I wrote down my notes so I would try to answer it. I think those were the two things, but just more benchmarking and then out of the box thinking. And then of course, whatever support we can do outside of this
Mhm.
to help get us to where we need to be, I'm willing to do that.
Thank you. I want to talk real quick about what you mentioned about benchmarking. I started to tell you, oh yes, I have 40 of my colleagues on speed dial because I'm a trustee with the U.S. Conference of Mayors Workforce Development Council. Texas is the only state in which childcare resides in workforce. So as good as those people are, they're not going to know a thing about workforce, which I have to know about. It's going to be a crosswalk. I'll see if I can identify some colleagues who could put me in touch quickly with their childcare people. San Diego comes to mind. They're very innovative. Chicago is a definite. Charlotte is a definite.
Okay.
Those ladies and I stay closely connected because we have such similar issues in our markets. Can y'all name anybody else? So if I get Chicago, well, we had New York, Chicago, San Diego. I think that's I think it's a more typical California than LA.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
about, do you have any contacts in Colorado or Denver?
Not in childcare, but I do, thanks to you, I do have a conversation coming up with Dr. Cordova from
Oh.
DSD. She's
Yeah.
reached out
And she,
and we're going to
yeah,
have.
so she'll probably know Denver connections.
Well, I mentioned to her Stephanie Veck, who used to be the director of workforce at Colorado, who was my colleague, and we even presented together. And suddenly something went click because it was like, oh, Stephanie and I travel together, oh, I know her very well. And so we're starting to figure out who we know in similar circles, and hopefully she'll push me. I'm sure she's already talking to that person with her work here. So we'll see what we can get out of Denver as well.
Good.
I don't know about Atlanta. Anybody?
I don't know. I'd probably recommend like talking with, if you've got the contact, if not, happy to connect with Childcare Aware or with Start Early or some other groups that are working across a lot of these constituencies and have been doing a lot of kind of this benchmarking also.
Okay, that would be great. If you send me something for Childcare Aware and a contact, I will pursue it.
Fantastic.
Come up with that would be great. Okay. Well, that gives us 5 to 6, Stephanie. Hopefully that'll be similar markets, people that do have a good economy right now. So people need to get back to work. They do have challenges of poverty. I could add Philly to that list probably. I'll tell you, there are jobs going wanting every day, and there are people who do not have jobs. There is a mismatch. I have an interview at 3 with the Morning News with Mitchell Sherman. Again, the she session, but also to talk about how this is affecting young and extremely, the old and the young who are still in the marketplace. It's a tough conversation, and the vaccines have not quelled the conversation. The vaccines have intensified some polarity that I'm not comfortable with. We had a situation where we sent someone to a job and it was subsidized. So there was a third-party employer. She immediately threw down, if a requirement is to get a vaccine, I'm not doing it. I want a legal opinion. That doesn't go over well with the employers right now. The legal opinion was, no, you don't have to get a vaccine. Now, as of today, I hear that Methodist Systems in Houston has now incorporated that into their hiring. If you want to work there, you have to get a vaccine. So it is causing a polarity out here. And people saying, I'm in this camp, I'm in that camp, and it should not affect employment. That's frightening to me. This is I have people that will probably not, I know people in the system. Tara and I have talked about the contractor systems, and there's people who are just definitely not. That's a healthcare decision. But when you work in healthcare, I can see with the hospitals. So you can see both sides.
Yeah.
Do you really want anybody administering vaccines or registering people for vaccines, and they themselves have not accepted that the vaccine is a purposeful thing? That's a little iffy for me. I would want to know that they've gotten their shot too, if I'm getting mine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. interesting times.
How, Susan, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and remember, we are recording. How is DISD's effort different than Early Matters? I think that's where I see the closer similarity, other than DISD will eventually offer services from 0 to 3 or simply studying it. I don't know yet.
I think they're really studying it. I don't know that there's the intent to offer services for 0 to 3. I think in terms of comparison to Early Matters really was the range of birth up through age 8 with a, and with a lot of their work being focused on pre-K, quite honestly. And so, what that meant is out of school time for kids, kindergarten through second, third grade kind of got left behind. And 0 to 3, who's always everybody's stepchild, has been left behind. So I think this is my understanding, and Alan can weigh in here, is really, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, so who's important in those first 3 years systemically, and how do you bring that all around the table? And certainly childcare is one of those really important systems, but it's not the only one. And how are we all working in tandem, or how can we all work in tandem? Because clearly we're not right now. I do think there is an initial strong focus on pre-K and childcare enrollment, and really hoping that people will come back and giving people information about the opportunities to enroll. But so I think that's probably what you'll see first, is consolidated, coordinated enrollment, whether it's in pre-K or other early childhood programs. But that's, and I also think it's fair to say it is at the very early stages of development. Yeah. So Alan, do you have anything else to say there?
Yeah, I just look, I think the tension that you're bringing up is real, right? And I guess, I don't know, in the decade or so that I've been kind of around this, there's a lot of people have come up with the like insight of, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could be the convener of, and I think that it just kind of misunderstand the space, that we're going to need a lot of different groups to come together. And I think some of our responsibility and kind of quote unquote kitchen cabinets, or whatever groups are coming around the effort in DISD, is to keep some attention there for DISD to keep asking the question, what is DISD's role in this space? That, we all have a responsibility individually, and this goes for CPAL too, but very frankly, I mean, we get asked the same thing, that what are the things that are really within our sphere of influence to do, and make sure that we're not sitting there just commenting on everyone else and focusing on everyone else's stuff, but there, is what resources does DISD have that could be better leveraged into the space of birth to 3. And if we don't answer that question with DISD pushing this, then it's probably been a miss. And that's kind of my push, at least.
I think we all have to stay in our lanes on this one, but the lanes could be, it could be a 7-lane highway with all the work there is to do. We just all need to pick a piece of that I know our role. I mean, as I say, we're a purchaser. Now I know we do a lot in quality space, but when you're spending as much as we're spending in subsidizing care, we are the largest purchaser of care. It's insane.
Yeah, Laura, I'll say, I don't think you have anything to worry. I mean, just from formal authority, there's nothing to worry about, right? But also, this is a chicken or egg thing. Your point's well taken. When there's a lot of money, like a lot of people come to start to flock, but also a lot of money gets unlocked when lots of people are flocking to an area. So I don't know which is the chicken or which is the egg, but like, we've got more resources, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I love the way you've said that when a school district the size of Dallas takes on an issue like early child that isn't exactly what they're paid to do, that other people start asking why. Oh, is that something we should be doing? Should we look at that? And it will heighten the conversation. Hopefully, if nothing else, they are a pathway to the 4-year-old education. They are a pathway conversation of how do you connect with families so that they sign up to go to publicly paid care for your children. I mean, I can see that role. And right now, nobody's doing that in the education space. And they don't, that's why it's so hard to catch them at 4.
So I have a very concrete example of how this might play out, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate here, so stop me and I'll take it offline and talk with you about it. But I think you know that SMU has a partnership with Toyota and with Dallas ISD. And so we're setting up the pre-K 8 school in West Dallas. And one of the aims of the partnership is to create a model in which you have integrated the out-of-school resources with the in-school resources. So one of the conversations we're having is around what about before the pre-K? And do we need to provide some pilot studies to see how we might integrate the 0 to 3 issues and care and so on into this model school. So that's an example, I think, of the industry kind of partnership you were talking about. But it's a specific example of how Dallas ISD might get into this game, and it would be through studying the outcomes of whatever it is we put in place before pre-K in West Dallas.
I mean,
That's an interesting
in
one.
general, the district has a very vested interest in what happens in kids 0 to 3, because that's, those are their future students. And if they get to pre-K behind, that just makes that, pre-K is fantastic. But if I'm already 3 years behind when I get to pre-K, I've still got a challenge. So there is, I think, Lori and Alan and Stephanie too, your point is well taken. I mean, it's I kind of think of it as, think about when the district jumped into the P-Tech space. There could have been a lot of questions as well, what is the district having to do with, with associate's degrees? But it's elevated that they aren't doing that all by themselves. They have a very strong partnership with private sector and with public dollars through the community college system. But it took, it kind of elevated the issue. And so I think that's where I'd say I see the opportunity. But it's really important to keep asking those questions, because the other thing is can happen, which this happened more than once. An entity that has not been involved in a specific area could, and I'm talking theoretically here, believe they discovered it or invented it. And so I think making sure that it is informed by people who actually are in one of those 7 or 10 or 57 lanes all the time, so you don't accidentally duplicate things or recreate or do something that is actually not very helpful. So I think that's, staying aware and staying engaged is important for all of us.
Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically speaking. That's right.
I would hate for them to build something that excludes our resources to invest in care, direct care. And I want to bring that to their attention, that please don't do this. 2% of the money is quality. Everything else is kids in care. And if they can't build a system of conversation, even at that early age for the 4s as well, we've lost most of our 4-year-old students in a good year. But now this is not a good year. So we're having to flex in our plans so rapidly. Is it a good year for 4-year-olds to go to public ed, or is it a year when they're going to go back into the centers? And if I think it's tough, imagine what a provider thinks in scaling those classrooms to meet license requirements and hire a teacher to be, teaching appropriate lessons to a group of 4-year-olds because they didn't expect to get 4-year-old enrollees this year. This is tough times. So the pandemic has only, as in every case, exacerbated existing gaps and problems. It just pointed them out, and we all need to respond to them.
And I think for me, what I'm hopeful about is because lots of people have tried and, dabbled in this space, and then they've decided it was too much of a mess and they've backed right out and said, here, let me pass that ball down. So maybe this is the opportunity where we don't do that again. But it's going to take tapping into people who have historical knowledge and understanding of how things work, as well as people who are comfortable asking questions as well why, and it has to be both. I don't think it can be done one without the other. So,
What
Part of it's breaking down those communication silos.
yeah,
There is no reason to replicate
No.
something that already exists and is working well. But you have to know, and you have to be able to connect to that. And that's what we haven't been able to do. The more I get into this school and the surrounding nonprofits and the family resources, the more I'm overwhelmed with how many players there are, and many doing the same thing,
and not knowing that they are.
and not knowing that they are doing the same thing and could put their resources to better use elsewhere if they knew it.
If you find something that we're doing, please let me know. As workforce, and this makes us popular and yet not popular. We have a lot of cash to spend in the space of childcare and workforce development and training. But people keep trying to define us in a way that is not who we are. This council is an administrative entity, oversight, funder. We're never showing up with our hand out. And that's almost a problem. I don't go to meetings and ask for money. And when you're not asking for money, people think, oh, well, you're irrelevant. It's like, no, we're fully funded. That's I know we're unique. So it's hard for us to get people to recognize all the things we do because we do so much. Right now, like Thrive defines us as labor exchange. Well, what about those 3,000 scholarships we write every year? That's not chump change at $12,000 a scholarship. That's a lot of money. So it's things like that getting word to the community. We've tried to do an elevator speech, but frankly, it would have to be the Green Tower with 69 floors to be able to say even half of what we do, because we touch so much. And it is complicated. So the other thing you can do for us, please, is begin to work on that elevator speech and make sure more people know what we do here and that they can call me at any time. Everybody in the community now has my cell number, but that's a good thing because people know they can get me on the phone and they're kind of amazed. And I'm like, no, we cut out my secretary when I moved here. When we moved out of the offices, Barbara's not in my calendar because there's no time for that.
No.
This is get it done and make people know they're heard.
I just think that's an advantage, Lori. I mean, the workforce solutions doesn't get near the accolades it deserves. And so I certainly recognize that. I think most of the board members genuinely recognize that. The larger board, I think everyone here definitely recognizes that. But a lot of the other organizations, they have to try to find ways to fund themselves. You're able to focus on impact. I mean, it really sort of doesn't matter how some folks, put you on a PowerPoint slide and define you, because you can focus your attention on actually helping real people, while they, try to convince each other that they've figured out, the perfect set of arrows going in different directions on where everyone fits.
Says the consultant.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
That's
you're right.
very well said.
No, I think Alan is exactly right. I mean, you have an incredible knowledge base that is so important to this community, Lori. And that's I think making sure that people hear that and hear the voices of other people that have that knowledge base, because it's just too easy to recreate stuff. I mean, at my office, we call that the Columbus paradigm, Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else? Well, thank you, Stephanie, Bessie, and Alan for being here today, and to our guests too, who were in the gallery as well. Thank you, as always, Lori. It is just such an honor to get to work with you. And please extend our thanks to Dee as well, because I know she's been.
She did work hard. She didn't want to miss this.
What do they say? As busy as a one-armed paper hanger. I believe our friend Mr. Munson told me that. Oh. All right. Have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.